The sound hit like a slap. At first, it was just one sharp boo, a single voice rising over polite applause. Then another. Then 50 more. Within seconds, the applause evaporated into chaos. Prince Harry froze behind the podium, the Canadian flag fluttering behind him, his jaw stiffening as the jeers grew louder. Veterans, men and women who had once served under the same Commonwealth banner that his ancestors commanded, were shouting for him to leave. One voice, raw with anger, cut through the air. Get the F*** out. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Have you ever seen a man realize, in real time, that he's lost the room? That's exactly what unfolded that day in Toronto. Cameras caught everything. The shifting faces in the crowd, the soldiers folding their arms, the organizers glancing nervously at each other. Harry's fingers gripped the edges of the lectern, as though holding onto it could hold back the tide of humiliation. He tried to smile. He even chuckled awkwardly, but the sound was swallowed by another round of boos. You could almost feel the disbelief ripple through the air. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not here. Not to him. For years, Harry had built his public image around veterans. The Invictus Games, the speeches, the charities, they were his safe ground. Soldiers were his people. They respected him because he had been one of them. But something had changed. And on that cold Toronto afternoon, the change wasn't subtle, it was deafening. The same audience that once rose to cheer him now rose to reject him. What went wrong? Why did the very community that helped define Harry's identity turn on him so brutally? Was this just public fatigue, or was it something much darker, something orchestrated? Because here's where it gets strange. Minutes after Harry was escorted off stage, something else happened, something far more invasive. His phone, protected by royal-grade security protocols, pinged an alert. An unknown access attempt. Within seconds, his communications were compromised. It wasn't just hecklers outside the venue. Someone, somewhere, was already inside his world, reading his words, tracing his next move. But we'll get to that. For now, picture the scene in full. The event was supposed to be the calm conclusion to Harry's two-day visit to Toronto, part public relations, part charity mission. A goodwill tour meant to rebuild trust with Canada's veterans after reports that millions in Invictus funding had gone unaccounted for. The organizers expected applause, maybe polite curiosity. Instead, they got rage. And it didn't erupt out of nowhere. The signs had been there all along. Murmurs of frustration, whispers among veterans groups about Hollywood Harry, about how he'd traded uniform for spotlight. When Harry stepped up to speak, the temperature of the room dropped. Cameras flashed. The words on his teleprompter glowed back at him. He started strong, the practiced rhythm of a royal addressing, the brave men and women who serve their nations with honor. But even as he spoke, a low murmur spread through the crowd. Someone in the front row shook their head. Someone else shouted something about betrayal. Harry tried to push through, his voice faltering on words that used to come easily: loyalty, brotherhood, duty. And then came the first boo. You could see it on his face, that split-second hesitation. The pause between confidence and disbelief. The tightening of his jaw as he tried to brush it off. But it didn't stop. The booing grew into a chant. "Get out! Get out!" one man yelled. A woman near the back joined in, shouting, "Not welcome here." The microphone caught every word, echoing across the venue. Imagine that humiliation, being a man once hailed as a war hero, now mocked by the very people you claim to represent. The crowd wasn't cruel for the sake of cruelty. It was emotional, personal. They felt betrayed. They'd watched Harry transform from soldier to celebrity, from advocate to headline. They'd read about his Netflix deals, his interviews, his accusations against his own family. And here he was, speaking of sacrifice and unity, words that no longer matched his actions. For many in that room, he had become a contradiction they couldn't stand to applaud. But here's the twist. Not everyone believed the booing was spontaneous. Some insiders claimed there were planted agitators among the audience. Individuals who arrived hours early, armed with placards and phones set to record. One security source later revealed that several of them weren't registered veterans at all. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe someone wanted this moment to go viral. Because it did. Within minutes, the clip was everywhere: Twitter, TikTok, YouTube. Prince Harry booed in Toronto. The hashtags exploded. And as millions replayed the moment, slow-motion edits turned his discomfort into content. The jeers became memes. Late-night shows replayed the audio with canned laughter. And while the internet was busy mocking him, another, quieter crisis was unfolding behind the scenes, his hacked phone. But before we dive into that digital nightmare, let's talk about what this meant emotionally. For Harry, Toronto wasn't just another stop on the calendar. This city had once been sacred. It was where he'd fallen in love with Meghan, where he'd been treated as the people's prince. He'd called it a second home. Now it was a battlefield. A journalist from CBC described it perfectly. It wasn't a protest. It was an exorcism. The crowd wasn't just rejecting Harry the man. They were purging the myth. The myth of the selfless prince, the veteran advocate, the relatable royal who walked away from privilege for principle. That myth had cracked long ago, and Toronto was where it shattered. Now ask yourself this. What happens to a man when the very story he's built his life on collapses in front of a live audience? When applause turns into condemnation? When the people who once saluted him now point and jeer? It's easy to dismiss it as another viral moment, another headline in the endless Sussex saga. But this one cut deeper. Because this wasn't Hollywood or politics. This was supposed to be his safe ground, his brothers in arms. And that betrayal hit harder than any tabloid jab could. After the speech, Harry was rushed out through a side door. Cameras caught him lowering his head, ignoring shouted questions from reporters. He didn't stop to greet anyone. His team looked pale, frantic. Meghan wasn't there, which made everything worse. Without her, he looked alone, exposed, vulnerable. Inside the black SUV waiting for him, Harry reportedly sat in silence. For 30 seconds, no one spoke. Then, according to one aide, he whispered something under his breath, a line that none of them could forget. They used to cheer. It's tragic, isn't it? The way admiration curdles into resentment. How fame turns from spotlight to microscope. And how, in the digital age, humiliation doesn't fade, it multiplies. But here's what most people missed. While Harry was processing his public embarrassment, his security team's devices began lighting up with alerts. Multiple devices, his phone, his communications tablet, his assistant's laptop, all showed signs of unauthorized access. At first, they assumed it was a routine glitch. Then, the system flagged a live trace, an active intrusion. Someone, during or immediately after the event, had hacked into Prince Harry's encrypted communication network. Coincidence? Or coordinated attack? The timing was too perfect. The moment Harry's reputation took a hit, so did his privacy. And when investigators began digging into the breach, they found something chilling. The hacker hadn't just accessed his device. They'd mirrored it. Every incoming and outgoing message, every email draft, every photo, all copied in real time. Whoever it was didn't want money. They wanted information. Now, imagine being Harry in that moment. Freshly humiliated, isolated, and now told that his private communications, possibly even his conversations with Meghan, had been compromised. The man who'd spent years fighting against press intrusion was once again defenseless. Only this time, the enemy wasn't a tabloid. It was invisible, digital, and relentless. Was the hacking related to the Toronto event? Some say yes. Others claim it was pure coincidence. But when a coordinated social media campaign emerged hours later, amplifying the booing and mocking Harry's nervous breakdown, it was hard not to see a connection. Something bigger was at play. And this wasn't the first time Harry had been targeted. Months earlier, cybersecurity firms had warned his team about vulnerabilities in his encrypted network, specifically during travel events. But those warnings were dismissed as routine. Now, they weren't so easy to ignore. Here's the most unsettling part. Traces of the intrusion led back to an IP address associated with an online forum known for trading stolen celebrity data. But what made this breach different was the precision. Whoever hacked him knew exactly when to strike, right when the world's eyes were on his humiliation. That wasn't random. That was strategy. As night fell over Toronto, Harry reportedly locked himself in his hotel suite. Curtains drawn. Phone switched off. Meghan was thousands of miles away, in California. They'd say he paced the floor for hours. At one point, he even asked, was any of this real? Did someone plan it? It's the question no royal ever wants to ask. Because once you start doubting the loyalty of the people around you, every smile looks like a mask. By morning, the headlines had shifted from booing to hacking. News anchors speculated about espionage, revenge leaks, even foreign involvement. It was chaos. But underneath the noise, something deeper was brewing. The unraveling of a man caught between the life he chose and the one he left behind. And as Harry boarded his flight out of Toronto, looking hollow and withdrawn, one thing became clear. This wasn't just a bad day. This was a turning point. The moment the public, the press, and even his allies began to see him differently. Not as the rebellious prince or misunderstood veteran, but as a man losing control of his own story. But the story wasn't over. Because what happened after he left Toronto, the files that surfaced, the calls that leaked, and the messages no one was supposed to read, would drag him deeper than ever before. And when the truth finally came out, it wouldn't just be his image at stake. It would be everything. Because the booing was only the beginning. And what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. It began with a sound. Not loud at first, but unmistakable. A low rumble, the kind that rolls through a crowd before it erupts into chaos. 1 second, Prince Harry was standing confidently behind the podium, delivering a speech he'd rehearsed dozens of times. The next, the atmosphere shifted. The polite silence turned sharp. And then it happened. The first boo tore through the air like a crack of thunder. Cameras zoomed in. Microphones caught every second. The prince froze. Imagine being in that moment. Thousands of eyes staring, the flag of the very nation you're trying to honor fluttering behind you. And suddenly you realize they don't want you there. For a split second, you can see it in Harry's face. Disbelief, confusion, a flicker of panic. Then he forces a smile, tries to regain composure, pretends it's nothing. But the crowd doesn't stop. The sound grows, spreading like fire across the rows of veterans and families. Boo! Get off the stage. Get the F*** out. The insults pierce through the microphone. Every word echoes back through the speakers, bouncing off the walls. There's no hiding now. This was supposed to be a triumphant return. Toronto, the city where the Invictus Games began, where Harry was once seen as a beacon of hope for wounded soldiers, where the crowd once stood in thunderous applause. But that was years ago, before the interviews, before the Netflix docuseries, before the accusations, before the world began to see him as a man more interested in fame than service. The veterans in the crowd weren't random. Many had served under the Commonwealth's banner. They remembered Afghanistan. They remembered Harry in uniform, walking through dusty fields with soldiers who respected him not for his title, but for his grit. And now they saw someone else, a man in designer shoes, talking about sacrifice from a stage built by sponsorship money. The disconnect was painful, palpable. One veteran later told a reporter, "He used to be one of us. Now he's one of them." And maybe that was it, the unspoken truth. The booing wasn't just anger, it was grief. Grief for the man they thought they knew. Grief for the leader he could have been. Still, not everyone in the audience jeered. Some sat quietly, uncomfortable, unsure how to react. Others clapped hesitantly, hoping to drown out the negativity. But the noise only grew. It became a wall of rejection, and there was no breaking through. Harry's voice trembled slightly. His words, about courage, resilience, and unity, suddenly rang hollow. Every sentence felt rehearsed. Every pause, artificial. The sincerity he was once known for was nowhere to be found. And yet, he kept going. He talked about the strength of veterans, about healing, about community. But as he spoke, his eyes darted toward his security detail, subtle, anxious glances that betrayed what his posture tried to hide. The booing wouldn't stop. Organizers shifted uneasily. One aide whispered something into a microphone. Reporters started moving toward the stage, sensing that something historic, or disastrous, was unfolding. This wasn't just another awkward moment. This was a rupture. Midway through the speech, Harry tried to recover. He smiled again, laughed nervously, and attempted to lighten the mood. "I know not everyone agrees with everything I've done," he said, trying for humility. "But I'll always stand by those who serve." The response was immediate, another wave of boos, louder this time. A man in the third row stood up, raised his hand, and shouted, "You betrayed your country." Another voice followed, "You abandoned your family." The crowd roared in approval. The camera crews zoomed in. One reporter whispered, "This is unreal." A producer nearby muttered, "He's losing them." And in that moment, even Harry seemed to know it. It's strange, isn't it? How quickly the public can turn. One day, you're their hero, brave, bold, misunderstood. The next, you're the symbol of hypocrisy. The same man who once stood shoulder to shoulder with soldiers now stood behind bulletproof glass, talking about struggle while living in a California mansion. To them, his words no longer carried weight, they carried irony. But here's where the story takes a twist. Several eyewitnesses later reported that the booing didn't seem entirely organic. It had rhythm, coordination. One man claimed he saw two individuals near the back cueing others with subtle hand signals, almost like they were orchestrating it. Another attendee noticed phones already recording before the boos even started, as if they knew exactly when the crowd would erupt. That's not random. That's choreography. Was it possible the booing was planned? A setup designed to humiliate him on an international stage? Or was it simply the inevitable backlash from a public that had grown tired of his contradictions? Either way, the optics were devastating. The clip went viral in less than an hour. Think about that. One 30-second video, and years of careful image management gone. The boos became headlines. Prince booed in Toronto. Veterans turn on Harry. From hero to heckled. Within hours, social media exploded. Memes flooded the internet. Late-night hosts joked about Harry's not-so-invincible Invictus. Hashtags like #BooGate and #TorontoTakedown trended for days. And through it all, Harry stayed silent. The middle of the story is where everything tightened. Inside the venue, chaos reigned. Security guards began moving closer to the stage, forming a half-circle around the prince. Organizers whispered frantically. Some audience members started leaving. Others stood, shouting both support and insults. One side of the room applauded, the other booed, the noise clashing like dueling thunder. It wasn't just an event anymore. It was a spectacle. A photographer captured a single frame that would dominate front pages the next day. Harry mid-speech, eyes downcast, lips parted as if mid-sentence, the crowd behind him blurred but visibly hostile. The picture told the whole story. It didn't need a caption. And somewhere in that same room, according to later reports, someone else was at work. A figure in the back row, laptop open, phone tethered. Not watching the stage. Watching a signal. A network. The first trace of an unauthorized digital connection to Prince Harry's communications team appeared around that time. Coincidence? Maybe. But strange, isn't it? How the worst moment of his public career coincided with the first major cyber attack against him. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. For now, the focus remained on the sound, the roar that swallowed his voice. After several painful minutes, Harry cut the speech short. His final words were nearly drowned out by the jeering. "Thank you," he said, forcing a polite smile that looked more like a wince. Then he stepped back, nodded once, and left the podium. As he exited the stage, some clapped out of sympathy. Others booed louder, almost gleeful now that he was retreating. It was over, but the damage was irreversible. Outside the venue, reporters swarmed the press area. Microphones were thrust toward anyone who'd speak. "Why did you boo? What message were you trying to send?" One veteran, still wearing his medals, didn't hesitate. He turned his back on the institution that made him, he said. "We're not angry at the prince. We're angry at the man he became." Another said quietly. He left the uniform behind long before he took it off. And there it was, the sentiment that echoed across Canada that night. Harry had changed. The Invictus Games had once symbolized his empathy, his understanding of pain and recovery. Now, they symbolized self-promotion. His sincerity had been replaced by spectacle, and the crowd wasn't buying it anymore. By the time Harry's convoy left the venue, he looked pale and shaken. A close aide described him as completely gutted. He didn't speak during the drive. His security team, on edge, kept scanning their devices for chatter. And that's when they noticed it, the first notification of an attempted breach. A small, almost invisible digital alert. One that would spiral into something far more sinister within hours. Back in the hotel, Harry reportedly sat in silence, scrolling through his phone, watching replay after replay of the booing on social media. Each clip got worse. More zoomed in, more exaggerated, with mocking captions overlaid in bold red letters. It wasn't just the crowd that booed him now. It was the world. And as he sat there, staring at the screen, his phone suddenly flickered. Just for a moment. Then again, a message popped up, a warning from his security software. New device attempting access. His bodyguard leaned over his shoulder, eyes narrowing. Probably a glitch, he said. But it wasn't. It was the beginning of something much larger. He didn't have an answer. Because before dawn broke over Toronto, his phone would ping again, and this time, it wouldn't be a warning. It would be a breach. And what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. The moment the crowd erupted in boos, every camera in the room turned toward the stage. But somewhere in the far left corner, someone else was watching something different. Not the prince, not the people, but the signals. It wasn't just an audience that filled that hall. It was a network, Wi-Fi routers, Bluetooth connections, encrypted feeds for media crews. Dozens of digital doorways, all open, all vulnerable. And amid the noise, one device quietly reached out to another, a handshake no one in the crowd could see. While the world focused on Harry's humiliation, a different kind of invasion had already begun. He never saw it coming. None of them did. It started small, a packet of data slipping through the cracks of a public connection, cloaked inside harmless background noise. One security tech later described it as a needle inside a needle, wrapped in static. Within seconds, it had infiltrated the communication system that connected Harry's private security network to his personal devices. To most people, it would have looked like nothing, a flicker on a screen, a harmless delay. But to someone who knew what to look for, it was the digital equivalent of picking a lock. And behind that lock lay everything. Private messages, contacts, drafts, documents, voice memos, even location data. So who was this person? And why strike at that moment? That's where things get murky. Some reports suggest the hacker was physically present, a man with a laptop in the audience, pretending to livestream. Others say the breach came from a hotel Wi-Fi node planted days earlier. The truth? We may never know. But what's certain is that whoever orchestrated it was prepared, patient, and disturbingly precise. They knew exactly when to strike, right as the booing began. It makes sense, doesn't it? When chaos erupts, attention scatters. Security teams focus on crowd control, not code. And in that 15-minute window of noise, someone slipped right past the guards. Later that night, when Harry's security analyst reviewed the breach, one thing stood out. The hacker wasn't just taking, they were watching in real time. They didn't copy files and leave. They mirrored everything, as if shadowing Harry's digital reflection. It was an ongoing feed, not a theft. That's what made it terrifying. Imagine this. Every text Harry sent to Meghan, every email draft to his foundation, every private thought he'd typed and never sent, all mirrored to someone else's screen, live. They didn't just steal his data. They stole his moment-to-moment life. And maybe, just maybe, that was the point. Because what if the humiliation in Toronto wasn't just about public perception, but control? A takedown not only of his reputation, but his privacy. A coordinated move designed to shake him on every front. Emotional, professional, personal. Think about it. The booing and the breach happening at the exact same time? That's not coincidence. That's choreography. One digital forensics expert later said, this wasn't an amateur job. This was a professional-grade intrusion. Whoever did this had resources. Translation? It wasn't some random hacker in a basement. It was someone with access, timing, and intent. And here's where the story takes an eerie turn. At 8:47 p.m., an alert appeared on Harry's internal network. Suspicious access detected. It was flagged as medium priority, not urgent, but enough to catch attention. His lead bodyguard noticed it, frowned, then dismissed it, assuming it was a press server pinging his signal. Standard interference, they thought. They had no idea that by that point, the hacker had already mapped every connected device in Harry's radius. Every single one, even his security earpiece. Now, imagine being that hacker for a second, sitting in the crowd, surrounded by flashing cameras, hearing the boos echo off the walls, and knowing that while the world humiliated Harry in public, you were dismantling him in private. It's dark, it's methodical, and it's brilliant in a horrifying way. The hacker didn't need to touch the stage. They had front-row seats to something much better, access to Harry's digital soul. Meanwhile, in the green room backstage, Harry sat slumped in a chair, trying to make sense of what had just happened. "It wasn't supposed to go like this," he murmured. One of his aides handed him a bottle of water. Another stared at the laptop feed showing Twitter exploding with clips. The mood was toxic: anger, disbelief, embarrassment. No one noticed the open Wi-Fi network listed at the bottom of the staff computer's screen. It read, "Royal Device Secure." Except it wasn't. The real network was RD Secure 2025. That one, the decoy, was the hacker's creation. A perfect imitation. The aide had unknowingly connected to it minutes earlier when checking social media. That was the door. That's all it took. From that moment on, the hacker wasn't just inside Harry's network. They were inside his world. Files began uploading automatically. Folders labeled Toronto Briefing, Speech Drafts, and M_contacts. The system showed no sign of intrusion, no alerts, no warnings. Silent extraction, clean and invisible. By the time Harry left the building, the breach was complete. And here's the chilling part. The hacker left a signature. Not a name, not an IP address. Just a single phrase embedded inside a data fragment later recovered by investigators. "Hello again, Captain." Captain. That was Harry's rank in the British Army. Only someone who knew his military past, or wanted him to think they did, would use that. Was it taunting? Familiarity? Revenge? Theories flew. Some claimed it was an inside job, a rogue former associate, maybe even a former soldier angry about the prince's transformation. Others whispered about state-level interference. But whoever it was, they knew how to get under his skin. Back in his hotel suite that night, Harry's phone buzzed with a notification he didn't recognize. A strange icon, unfamiliar, almost glitching, appeared in the corner. He frowned, tapped it. The screen flashed once, then returned to normal. Nothing unusual. At least, that's what it seemed. Moments later, his device sent out a signal, not to his security network, not to his team, but to an unknown relay point registered offshore. The hacker had activated remote mirroring. From that point on, every message Harry typed, every photo he opened, every app he used, was duplicated somewhere else. And here's where things turned truly disturbing. At 9:21 p.m., Megan texted him. It wasn't anything dramatic. Just a short message. How did it go? Harry hesitated before replying. He typed, deleted, then finally sent. Could have been better. 3 seconds later, that same message appeared on a mirrored screen in another country. A digital twin of his private conversation. Someone was watching. By midnight, the hacker had collected over 3.2 gigabytes of data, a small but powerful trove of personal insight. Among them were fragments of unreleased Invictus plans, internal communications about funding, and several unsent drafts of letters addressed to palace officials. The hacker didn't need to release anything. Just having it was enough. The power wasn't in exposure, it was in possession. Because what's more terrifying than a secret revealed? A secret held hostage. Around 2 a.m., Harry's head of security received a message from their IT team. "We have a problem." That's when the panic began. Devices were quarantined. Networks disconnected. But it was too late. The mirror feed had already moved beyond their reach. And as they scrambled to shut it down, something strange happened. The hacker sent a message directly to Harry. Not an email. Not a text. A system-level notification that appeared across every connected device at once. The words were simple, chilling, and precise. "You've lost control, Captain." Harry froze. He read it twice. His heart raced. The room fell silent. The message vanished seconds later. Who sends something like that? Someone who wants to be seen. Someone who wants fear, not anonymity. The next morning, Harry's team brought in cybersecurity experts from Canada and the UK. The findings were brutal. Whoever had breached his network had used tools that were almost military-grade. Encrypted scripts, rotating IPs, real-time cloaking. This wasn't random, one expert said. It was strategic. Strategic, that word stuck. Because when the hacker struck, they didn't demand ransom, they didn't leak files, and they didn't disappear. They stayed. Observing. Tracking. Waiting. Waiting for what? That's the part no one could answer. The breach didn't just expose data, it exposed cracks in Harry's world. His team turned on each other, accusing one another of negligence. There were arguments about who'd left the fake Wi-Fi open, who'd ignored the early alerts. Blame spiraled like wildfire. Meanwhile, Megan's calls went unanswered. Reports say she was furious, not just about the booing, but about the silence. "You should have been ready for this," she allegedly told him later. "You're not some rookie celebrity." But that wasn't what haunted Harry. It was the phrase, "Hello again, Captain." He couldn't shake it. It played in his head like an echo. Had he crossed paths with this person before? Was this personal? He began revisiting names, old military contacts, former aides, even journalists he'd angered. The list grew longer, and so did the paranoia. Every familiar face began to look suspicious. Every call felt compromised. By day 3, he'd stopped using his phone entirely. His team issued him a new device, but he didn't trust it. "If they can get in once, they can get in again," he muttered. For the first time in years, the prince who'd grown up under relentless public scrutiny truly disappeared. No tweets, no statements, no photos. Just silence. But silence only fuels curiosity. The media, hungry for answers, began asking questions. Who hacked Prince Harry? Was this political espionage? A disgruntled ex-employee? Or something worse? And then came the bombshell, the first leaked file. A single screenshot surfaced online showing the header of a private email chain between Harry and an unnamed contact. The subject line? Invictus Funding Adjustments. The content was blurred, redacted, but the implications were huge. Money, adjustments, secrecy. Theories exploded overnight. Was someone leaking from inside? Was the hacker feeding information directly to the press? Whatever the truth was, it painted a picture far more complicated than a single breach. It hinted at something coordinated, something meant to dismantle Harry's credibility piece by piece. And as the world debated, Harry sat alone, staring at his new phone, waiting for the next move. Because whoever this hacker was, they weren't finished. Not by a long shot. Because when someone greets you with "hello again," it means this isn't their first time watching. And as Harry would soon discover, the hacker hadn't just come for his data. They'd come for his secrets, and for someone very close to him. But what they found inside his phone that night would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The morning after the Toronto debacle, the city was still buzzing. News vans crowded outside Harry's hotel, lenses pointed toward the entrance like rifles waiting for movement. Inside, the air was heavy, part embarrassment, part exhaustion. Harry sat at the edge of his bed, staring at the half-empty glass of water on the nightstand. He hadn't slept. His phone was still in his hand. The screen kept lighting up, not with calls from officials or palace aides, but from one person, Meghan. Her first message came just after dawn. "How are you holding up?" It was simple, neutral, and carefully phrased. Almost too careful. Harry hesitated before replying. "Rough day." He hit send, then stared at the screen. The 3 dots appeared. She was typing. Then stopped. Then started again. Then stopped once more. Finally, a new message appeared. "You can't let them see you break. They want that." It wasn't wrong, but it wasn't comforting, either. That was Meghan's tone lately. Clinical, strategic, always measured. She wasn't talking to her husband anymore. She was managing a brand. To her, every public crisis was a narrative to control, a story to reshape before it turned into a monster. Harry understood that. He'd watched her handle media storms with precision. But this time felt different. The wounds weren't external. They were personal. And no PR strategy could rewrite what happened the night before. Still, her messages kept coming. "I told you not to let them bait you. You should have kept it short. We can spin this. Trust me." That last one stung. Spin this? He wasn't a scandal. He was a man who'd just been booed by veterans he once fought beside. There was no spinning that. There was only shame. He typed back. "They're angry. They think I've changed." Meghan replied instantly. "Then prove you haven't." Short, sharp, strategic. But buried underneath the words was something else, a flicker of frustration. It wasn't the first time tension had crept into their messages. Over the past few months, since the Netflix fallout and public criticism, their conversations had shifted from personal to tactical. Less, "How are you feeling?" and more, "What's the damage?" They weren't partners fighting the world together anymore. They were co-SOS managing a crisis empire. And yet, behind every carefully chosen line, there was something unspoken. Fear. Both of them knew it. Their public credibility was slipping. For Harry, the booing was a wake-up call. For Meghan, it was a potential PR catastrophe. One that could sink everything they'd built. The brand, the projects, the deals. So when the hacking news broke just hours later, Meghan's tone changed completely. At first, She didn't believe it. Someone hacked you? That's impossible. Your security's top level. It's real, Harry replied. They've mirrored my device. How do you know? There's a message. They call me Captain. That stopped her. There was a long pause before she responded. Captain? As in military? That's weird. Weird was an understatement. But Meghan didn't linger on fear. She pivoted straight to control. Okay, we can't let this leak. Say nothing. Not to anyone. Harry frowned. The team's already investigating. Her next message came seconds later. Then tell them nothing personal. You don't know who's feeding who. The irony hit hard. The woman who'd spent years accusing the royals of secrecy was now the one whispering caution. But she was right about one thing. The hacker wasn't just stealing files. They were hunting for something specific. The intrusion hadn't stopped. Every time Harry's device synced, new data was extracted. One IT specialist called it an open artery. No matter what they blocked, the hacker kept finding a way back in. And then, something stranger happened. Around noon, Harry's security team detected a surge of activity from a cloud folder synced to his phone. It was a backup archive, messages, photos, old recordings. Someone was downloading them. Fast. But when they traced the route, they found something disturbing. The file wasn't being pulled from the cloud. It was being pulled from another device, Meghan's. The hacker hadn't just mirrored Harry's phone. They'd jumped the link and found hers. That discovery sent a chill through the room. Meghan's phone, in California, thousands of miles away, had become part of the breach. The hacker now had access to both ends of their private communication, unfiltered, unguarded, unedited. Every argument, every confession, every secret. Harry called her immediately. Meg, your phone's compromised. There was a pause. What do you mean? They've got your messages. Our messages. That's not possible. My network's private. It's happening now. They're pulling data. Her voice sharpened. Shut it down. Everything. Airplane mode. Kill the signal. It was the first time Harry had heard genuine fear in her voice since the fallout began. Not fear of the hacker, but fear of exposure. Because if the hacker really had those messages, then they had everything. Not just their emotional confessions, but their strategic ones. The private messages between them weren't all harmless. Some were brutally honest. Some revealed rifts. And some, the ones Harry dreaded most, exposed Meghan's true thoughts about people, deals, and power plays. Messages like one she sent weeks earlier. You'll never win sympathy again if you keep talking about the army. The world's moved on, Harry. You need a new story. Or another, after a canceled event. They don't hate you. They're bored. Make them care again. Harsh words. Calculated advice. But in the hands of a hacker? They weren't just advice. They were ammunition. When Harry's team briefed him on the situation, he went pale. How much could they see, he asked. The lead technician hesitated. Everything, sir. Everything. Yes. Even the deleted messages. He sank back into his chair. Deleted. That meant the ones he thought were gone. The ones from their worst fights, their most private moments, were now exposed. And one of them, buried deep in the chain, would soon become a bombshell. It was a message Meghan had sent months ago during a heated argument, back when rumors of her tension with Palisades were peaking. The words were brutal, emotional, and unfiltered. I wish you'd stop pretending to be a soldier. You're not saving anyone anymore. It was raw, human, and angry. But taken out of context, it sounded cold, even cruel. And that's exactly how the hacker intended to use it. Hours later, the first leak hit social media. A screenshot of that single line, stripped of date or context. I wish you'd stop pretending to be a soldier. Within minutes, the world erupted. Headlines exploded across Twitter and online tabloids. Meghan Markle mocks Harry's military past. Leaked message exposes Meghan's disdain for veterans. Prince's wife calls him a fraud during Toronto visit fallout. It spread like wildfire. Millions shared it. Analysts debated its authenticity. Supporters rushed to her defense. Critics tore her apart. And through it all, neither Meghan nor Harry said a word. But silence, in moments like this, sounds a lot like guilt. Behind the scenes, Meghan was furious. Not at the hacker, at Harry. You should have protected this, she snapped during a phone call later that evening. You let them in. I didn't let anyone in, he replied, voice rising. You left the door open. You and your team. This isn't about a door, Meg. Someone targeted us. Someone always is. And you never see it coming. The argument spiraled. It wasn't just about the hack anymore. It was about everything: the booing, the press, the trust between them. For the first time in months, the cracks were visible. And as they argued, somewhere far away, the hacker kept watching. The mirrored feed still active. Their voices, their words, their anger, all being recorded. The world saw headlines. The hacker saw the real story. By nightfall, Meghan's PR team had issued a statement denying the message's authenticity. But the damage was done. Even if fake, it felt true enough to stick. Public sentiment began to shift again, not with outrage this time, but fatigue. People were tired of the drama, the denials, the endless crises. Sympathy was evaporating. Harry sat alone, scrolling through his phone, watching the coverage unfold. Every headline felt like a personal failure. Every comment, a jab at the person he thought he was. He replayed the crowd's boos in his head, over and over. And now, layered on top of that noise, was another voice, Meghan's, sharp and cutting, forever preserved in leaked pixels. But here's where the story takes its most unsettling turn. At 11:52 p.m., another message appeared on his screen. It wasn't from Meghan. It wasn't from his team. It came from an anonymous number. "You haven't lost everything yet, Captain. Not if you play along." Attached was a file name, proof_of_loyalty to zip. Harry's stomach dropped. He didn't open it. His instincts screamed not to. But the implication was clear. This wasn't random. The hacker wasn't after money. They wanted control. They wanted him to participate. When he showed the message to his lead technician, the man went pale. If you open that file, it could compromise everything. Harry stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the message, torn between curiosity and fear. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. Outside, the noise of Toronto nightlife seemed distant, unreal. He turned off the phone. For the rest of the night, he didn't move, didn't speak, just sat in silence, the weight of everything pressing down. The booze, the hack, the leak, the doubt. And somewhere, miles away, on a screen only one person could see, a digital map blinked with his location. The hacker's cursor hovered over his name, Captain HW, before a new file began uploading. It was labeled simply, stage_2. What was in that file would make the booing look like nothing at all. Because the next leak wouldn't come from Harry's phone, it would come from Meghan's private call. And what the hacker captured next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The news didn't break, it detonated. By sunrise, every major network from London to Los Angeles had plastered the same headline across their screens. Meghan Markle's text leaks, calls Prince Harry's military image a lie. Anchors smiled grimly as they dissected the message. Analysts lined up to debate whether it was authentic or fabricated. For once, both tabloids and mainstream outlets found common ground. They smelled blood in the water. Harry's humiliation in Toronto was yesterday's story. Today, the feeding frenzy had begun. Inside the hotel suite, Harry sat with his head in his hands, staring at the television. Every station had the same loop, a still image of him on stage with the crowd jeering, followed by the leaked message in bold red letters. "I wish you'd stop pretending to be a soldier." The footage replayed like a punishment. A veteran's audience booing him, then the words of his own wife undercutting everything he'd built. It was cinematic irony, and the media devoured it like candy. By mid-morning, the networks had already named the scandal, the Toronto betrayal. "Have you seen this?" Meghan's voice crackled through the phone, urgent, defensive. "They're twisting it. They're saying I mocked veterans. I didn't. That message was private, emotional, and taken out of context." Harry didn't answer. "Harry," she pressed, "we need to respond. We need to control the narrative before it controls us." There it was, that word again. Control. But how do you control a storm that's already circling the globe? Outside, reporters had gathered like vultures. Paparazzi lenses glinted from across the street. Security blocked the lobby doors. Toronto, a city that once welcomed Harry like a hometown hero, now looked at him through a different lens, curiosity tinged with disdain. And inside that chaos, a single thought echoed through his mind. How did this spiral so fast? The answer was simple. The media didn't create the fire. They fanned it. Because in the modern world, outrage isn't news, it's currency. Within 12 hours, over 40 opinion pieces had been published. Every outlet framed the story differently. British tabloids leaned into betrayal. American talk shows leaned into drama. Canadian broadcasters took a more patriotic tone, questioning why public funds were spent on his visit in the first place. A Toronto radio host summed it up perfectly. We paid for his security, his hotel, his entourage, and he couldn't even deliver a respectful speech without getting booed. Now we find out his own wife thinks it's all an act? Please. It stung because it sounded believable. The media had found its perfect villain arc, the fallen prince and his calculating wife. They didn't need evidence. They had a narrative that fit too neatly to resist. And that's when the spin machine kicked in. Within hours, two different PR teams were already fighting for dominance. One from Meghan's camp in California, the other from Harry's aides in Canada. Both were working toward the same goal, but in entirely different ways. Meghan's team focused on deflection. It's fake, they told reporters. AI-generated. Deepfake text reconstruction. They pitched sympathetic headlines to lifestyle outlets, hoping to shift focus back to Meghan's humanitarian projects. Harry's team, on the other hand, pushed for damage control through transparency. It's real, but it's private, they argued. A moment of marital frustration taken out of context. Two narratives. One couple. One implosion. And the media? They didn't care which version was true. They just wanted the fight. Because when a couple publicly disagrees, it sells twice. By late afternoon, the first television debates had begun. Commentators speculated on what the message revealed about their marriage. One even suggested it hinted at deeper cracks. Maybe Meghan's patience with Harry's hero complex has worn thin. Another went further. Could this be the beginning of a royal split? The irony was almost cruel. The world that once demanded transparency from them was now weaponizing it. Back in the hotel, Harry's communications director suggested they release a joint statement. Say you're united. Say the messages were stolen. Say you're focusing on veterans. Harry shook his head. That'll just make it worse. If we speak, they'll twist it. Then do nothing? The aide asked. Harry looked up, eyes hollow. Sometimes silence speaks louder than truth. It wasn't silence the media heard, though. It was weakness. By nightfall, headlines had shifted again. Palace sources say Harry crippled by guilt. Where did that quote come from? Nowhere. It didn't matter. It sounded plausible. And in the noise, one network broke ranks. A smaller, independent outlet released something no one else had. A short, grainy audio clip allegedly recorded backstage after the Toronto event. The voices were muffled, but clear enough to recognize. A man, Harry, could be heard saying, "They used to cheer." Then another voice, lower, female, whispered, "Because they used to believe." The world assumed it was Meghan. The audio went viral instantly. Now it wasn't just text messages, it was tapes. Except Harry knew one thing. Meghan hadn't been there. The voice wasn't hers. So where did the recording come from? His stomach twisted as realization dawned. If the hacker had access to his phone's microphone, they could have activated it remotely. The so-called leaked audio could have been created by manipulating his own voice recordings. The media didn't care about authenticity, they only cared about clicks. Meghan's team scrambled to release a counter-statement. The audio is fabricated. Our legal team is investigating digital manipulation. But the denial barely registered. Once a narrative catches fire, logic can't extinguish it. By morning, the story had evolved again. Sources claimed the hacker was a disgruntled former Palisade. Another paper insisted it was an activist group angry over Invictus funding. A tech magazine ran with a third theory, that the breach was the work of a private intelligence firm testing its reach. Each outlet claimed exclusive sources. None could prove a thing, but they didn't have to. They'd already accomplished what they wanted, confusion. Because confusion keeps people watching. Behind the scenes, Harry's legal team began sending takedown notices. But it was like playing whack-a-mole. Every time one clip disappeared, 3 new versions popped up elsewhere. And the hacker? Silent. Not a trace. Not a demand. Just watching. That was the most unnerving part. Whoever had done this wasn't after money or fame. They were after chaos. Meanwhile, Meghan's California team convened a crisis meeting. One insider, speaking anonymously, later described her mood as volcanic. She allegedly slammed her phone down and shouted, "This is sabotage. Someone's trying to bury us alive." Her chief strategist suggested a pivot. We can't fight them on facts. We fight on emotion. Turn this into a redemption story. Release photos of you and Harry together, smiling. Make it look like you're rising above it. And just like that, the spin machine shifted again. The next morning, glossy paparazzi photos surfaced. Harry and Meghan holding hands on a balcony, smiling faintly, the caption reading, "Unbothered." But insiders knew those photos weren't recent. They'd been taken weeks earlier in California. Meghan's team had simply re-released them to steer the story back toward positivity. It worked, briefly. The photos dominated social feeds for half a day. But then, a new twist emerged. A Canadian journalist investigating the Toronto event uncovered discrepancies in the event's budget. Expenses that didn't add up, payments that led nowhere. Suddenly, the conversation shifted from scandal to suspicion. Where did the money go? One headline asked. And who benefited? The hacker didn't need to release anything. The media had done the job for them. And as suspicion grew, so did the pressure on Harry. Veteran groups demanded transparency from his foundation. Critics questioned whether the booing had been spontaneous or orchestrated as protest against financial mismanagement. Harry's entire legacy, his work with wounded soldiers, was now being painted with the same brush as the scandal. That's when he realized something chilling. The hacker wasn't attacking him directly anymore. They were attacking what defined him. Invictus, veterans, trust. All of it was now under siege, not through theft, but through perception. That night, alone in his suite, Harry flipped through channels, watching his own downfall narrated by strangers. Every talking head had an opinion. Every network had a theory, but not one of them had the truth. At 11:15 p.m., his phone buzzed again. An anonymous message, the same sender as before. "Nice try with the balcony photos, Captain. You can't outspin the truth." He froze. "Who are you?" he typed back. No reply. Then, 30 seconds later, another message appeared. "You'll know soon. Check your inbox at sunrise." Harry didn't sleep that night. At dawn, his inbox pinged. Inside was a single email. No text, no signature, just a link. The subject line read, "Raw footage, Toronto." His hands shook as he hovered over the link. Was it another leak? A virus? A trap? He clicked. The video loaded, unedited, unfiltered footage of the Toronto event from an angle no one had seen before. It showed the booing, the crowd, the chaos. But this time, there was more. A voice near the microphone, whispering, "Now." And the moment it was said, the booing began. It wasn't spontaneous. It was timed, triggered, controlled. The realization hit him like ice. The humiliation, the hack, the leaks, they weren't random. They were orchestrated. But by who? That question would haunt him in the hours that followed. Because somewhere, hidden in the footage metadata, was a clue the hacker wanted him to find. One that would lead straight to a name he never expected. A name connected not to a stranger, but to someone in his own circle. And what Harry would uncover next would unravel everything he thought he knew about loyalty. Because the booing wasn't the worst betrayal that day. The worst one was standing right beside him, and no one saw it coming. It started with a whisper. Not a metaphorical one. An actual whisper, barely audible at first. A man's voice, off camera, saying a single word, "Now." That one syllable changed everything. The uncut Toronto footage had revealed what no one expected, that the booing wasn't spontaneous, that it had been cued, that someone had triggered it like pulling a lever in a theater. And the more Harry watched, the more his stomach turned. He replayed it again and again, zooming in on faces in the crowd, trying to see who spoke the word. But every time, the same haunting detail stood out. The microphone on his podium had picked it up, faintly, as if whoever said it had been close, very close. Not in the crowd, on stage. That realization hit him like a gut punch. For the first time since the humiliation began, Harry felt something sharper than embarrassment, rage. Someone had set him up. The timing was too perfect. The booing, the hacking, the leaks, the taunting messages. It wasn't random chaos. It was orchestration. And when you've spent your entire life surrounded by people paid to smile and protect you, the idea that one of them might be working against you isn't paranoia, it's survival instinct. "Get everyone in here," he told his aide. Now. Within minutes, 5 members of his security and communications team crowded into the hotel suite. They'd all seen the headlines, all watched the public meltdown unfold in real time. But none of them knew what Harry had just found. He played the clip. The room went silent. Then he paused it. right at the frame where the whisper bled through the audio. "You hear that?" They nodded. "Enhance it," he said. His tech advisor scrubbed the track, isolating the sound, boosting frequencies. The whisper grew clearer, distorted, but unmistakably human. Now, the voice was male, calm, commanding. Someone had been in on it. But who? That question would consume Harry for the next 24 hours, until another, even more devastating recording surfaced. Because that same night, just as he was preparing to contact cybersecurity officials, a new leak appeared online. This time, it wasn't video. It was audio. A 2-minute clip uploaded anonymously to a dark web forum and titled simply, "The Real Harry, Toronto Backstage." Within minutes, it spread across Reddit, Telegram, and Twitter. It was everywhere. At first, people thought it was fake. But then they heard the voice, unmistakably his. It began with the sound of footsteps, then a door slamming. A man's voice, Harry's, saying, "They used to cheer." A pause. A shaky exhale. Then the same voice again, softer this time. "Maybe they're right." The crowd online went feral. For months, critics had called him out of touch, accused him of playing victim, of losing the humility that once made him beloved. And now here he was, seemingly admitting defeat, questioning his own worth. But that wasn't the part that broke him. It was what came next. A second voice, female this time, calm, deliberate, and cold. "Because they used to believe in you. Now they don't." The audio cut there. The internet exploded. Everyone assumed it was Meghan. The voice sounded eerily like hers. Same tone, same accent, same cadence. The timing made sense. The emotional sting fit the narrative. The headlines wrote themselves. Leaked audio exposes Meghan's heartless words. Caught on tape, Markle crushes Harry backstage. "They don't believe in you," Meghan's coldest line yet. It was the perfect storm, emotional, scandalous, and cinematic. But there was one problem. The conversation never happened. At least, not like that. Harry had never spoken those words to Meghan. The voice wasn't hers. But no one wanted to hear that version of the truth. The audio was too powerful, too real, too perfect to question. His team scrambled to contain it. They contacted the platform moderators, demanded takedowns, issued statements calling it digitally manipulated audio designed to deceive. But it was already too late. The clip had been downloaded millions of times. Every influencer, every gossip show, every royal commentator had shared it with captions dripping in mock sympathy. "This is what rock bottom sounds like," one tweet read, garnering 8 million views. And as the world judged his marriage in stereo, Harry's private hell deepened. Because once again, the hacker had struck. And this time, they'd done something new. They hadn't just leaked. They'd fabricated. Digital forensics later revealed that the voice lines had been spliced together from older recordings, some from public speeches, others possibly extracted from voice memos on his phone. The hacker hadn't just stolen his data, they'd weaponized his own voice against him. It was psychological warfare. And it was working. Harry's advisors debated their next move. One camp urged him to go public, to hold a press conference and tell the truth. The other warned that speaking out would only feed the narrative. "Once you respond," one said, "you validate it." But the silence was unbearable. That night, Meghan called. Her voice trembled, not with sadness, but fury. "They're making me out to be a monster," she snapped. "You have to say something." "Say what?" he asked. "That it's fake? They'll never believe us. You can't just hide." "I'm not hiding," he said quietly. "I'm surviving." It was the most honest thing he'd said in weeks. But honesty doesn't trend. Hours later, the hacker struck again, this time not with a leak, but with a message. Same anonymous number. Same taunting tone. "Losing control hurts, doesn't it, Captain? Let's see how your friends spin this one." Attached was another file. Audio again. Longer. He hesitated, then played it. The recording began with static. Then a conversation, faint, overlapping voices from what sounded like a hotel room. His team, discussing strategy. Panicked. Then, at the 38-second mark, a voice, male, familiar, said something that froze his blood. "Let it burn. The worse it gets, the more they'll trust us." The voice belonged to his communications director. Harry stopped the playback. If the clip was real, it meant someone on his own team was manipulating the chaos, using the leaks to build sympathy, to manage perception. If it was fake, it meant the hacker was trying to turn him against his people. Either way, trust shattered. He replayed the line again and again. Every time, the same sickening feeling rose in his throat. Had he been betrayed from within? The next morning, news networks reported another wave of chaos. The Toronto audio clip had been downloaded over 10 million times in less than 24 hours. YouTube, TikTok, and Twitter were flooded with reaction videos. Some users wept. Others mocked. A few conspiracy theorists even suggested the booing, the leaks, and the hack were part of a psyop orchestrated by the palace itself. It didn't matter that none of it made sense. People weren't looking for truth. They were looking for entertainment. And Harry was the show. By evening, even sympathetic outlets had turned cold. One anchor opened her segment with a line that burned. The prince who sought privacy is now drowning in exposure. Every attempt to repair his image only made things worse. Every silence was spun as guilt. Every denial became arrogance. Then came the final twist of the day, one that sent a chill through both Harry and his team. A major news outlet announced they had obtained the full, unedited audio recording of Harry's Toronto backstage meltdown from a verified source close to the event.